Hey, what's going on everybody? Gareth here, FCP Euro. Welcome back to another DIY video. Today we're going to be installing these front brakes, Zimmerman rotors, and TRW Ultra pads on this F30 328i xDrive behind us. This is going to be a traditional style brake setup with the floating caliper, so it sits on guide pins, more of a traditional setup. You might have seen another video that we uploaded which had to do with the radial mounted calipers or fixed position calipers, basically the Brembo calipers. These are exactly the opposite of that. So if you have an F30 with standard looking brakes, this is going to be the DIY video for you. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the tools you're going to need to do this job. So some of the tools you're going to need to do the front brakes on your F30 with the standard floating style calipers. You need an 18mm socket for removing the caliper carrier bolts, another 18mm socket for tightening. You could use the same, but I'm cheating with one of these impact swivel sockets to get the bolt out. 17mm lug nut socket or lug bolt socket, an 8mm Allen for the guide pin bolts, a 6mm Allen for the brake caliper set screw, a series of 3/8 ratchets, the most abused tool in the shop, the flathead screwdriver for prying, one of these caliper carrier hooks, super useful for hanging the caliper up and out of the way while you're doing other work. Torque wrench that could do 110 newton-meters of torque, and another torque wrench that could do within 30 newton-meters of torque. Also, super helpful to have a caliper compressor tool, makes it a lot simpler. Lights are always useful, and some of these electric impact tools, such as a die grinder for removing corrosion off the wheel hub, if it's there. Impact tool for removing some of the bigger bolts, and an electric ratchet for removing the guide pin bolts. Not necessary, but if you have them, super useful to have, and it makes the job a lot easier. So now we talked about the tools, let's go ahead and get into the job and see what's going to take to do it. So the first thing, you want to get the front of the vehicle up in the air, especially useful for the front because you want to be able to turn the wheel to be able to get better access to the caliper. This only works on the front axle, of course, but I've seen a lot of people try to do this with one side up in the air. It just makes it a lot more difficult. So try to get both sides up in the air and make sure it's properly supported. Whatever you do, please don't rely on hydraulic jacks to do this. You want to make sure that it is safely supported in the air and that it's not going anywhere. So with that said, 17mm socket for the lug bolts. This car has a wheel spacer on it, so just pull the wheel spacer off. Easy. Now you might notice that this hub is brand spanking new, no rust on it. That's because it is. It's less than a week old. So normally you'd have a whole bunch of corrosion on here. Today we're not working with corrosion, so that's nice. 6mm for the brake rotor set screw, which is nice and loose. Next up, we're going to take a flathead screwdriver on this anti-rattle clip, and we're going to pry. You want to pry the center section right here forward to release these two little hooks here on the caliper. Sometimes you can do this by hand, but it depends on how much spring pressure there is with this rattle clip. So there appears to be quite a bit. So I'm just going to use this flathead screwdriver, but as you saw, pressing against the middle here, I was able to depress it to get these ears unlocked from the caliper here. We have a tech tip video explaining this process. If you have any further questions, go ahead and watch that. Put a link in the description. So we're going to remove these covers for the caliper guide pins. Flathead screwdriver, super easy. Now, if your vehicle doesn't have these covers for the guide pins, you're going to want to replace them. You want to make sure these guide pins are protected from the elements. You can probably see a whole bunch of salt on this car. That's because we recently had a snowstorm, pretty big one. And the whole reason for these covers is to make sure the guide pin doesn't get covered and corroded, because that could prevent the caliper from being able to slide. I'm going to use an 8mm Allen to remove these guide pins. Go ahead and hang our caliper up and out of the way. You can see kind of all that corrosion that's on the guide pin. We're going to go ahead and clean that up before reinstalling. I'm going to use an 18mm socket to remove the caliper carrier bolts. Last but not least, we'll remove the rotor. And like I said, this is a brand new wheel bearing, so there's no corrosion on it. Normally you might have to tap the hat of the rotor a couple times to get it to break free. It's because of corrosion on the outside of the wheel hub here, which is pinching the rotor against the hub. So if you're having a hard time removing the rotor, it's probably because of that. But in this case, brand new, so came off easily. It was kind of nice for once. All right, next up, we're going to clean the guide pins and the caliper carrier. This is an important process, and going to reinstall everything. I want to make sure that all of these are clean for the new brakes. So first, we're going to go ahead and install the new rotor. Obviously, this is a Zimmerman Z-coated rotor. The whole rotor is coated. You do not need to clean it off prior to installation. You want to install it with the coating still on the friction surface. That'll all rub off when you go to bed in the pads. But these are clean to install out of the box, so there's no need to touch that. Next up, I'm going to reinstall the caliper carrier. 18 millimeter. I'm going to get torque to 110 newton meters. So I have our caliper here. I'm going to go ahead and push the piston back in. Should push back in easily. If you find that the piston is not going back in easily, you might have either a restricted brake hose, or you could have a bad caliper. We have our old pad wear sensor still hung up on the pad, so I'm just going to pop it out with the flathead screwdriver. Pull it up through the caliper. We'll replace that here shortly. We're going to take our new inboard pad. We're going to install it into the caliper. The retaining hook should just click in like that. Should feel somewhat tight when it's going in, but not too tight. And we're going to go ahead and install the new outboard pad like so. And now we're going to take our caliper, bring it back down onto the carrier. So now we're going to reinstall our guide pins. I want to go ahead and get the caliper lined up with the caliper carrier. These are 8 millimeter Allens. Torque spec on the guide pins is 28 newton meters. We're going to go ahead and reinstall, or actually install, our new pad wear sensor. So now, to get our old pad wear sensor out, we're just going to follow the line, which comes up along these mounting tabs all the way back to this little electrical box in the rear here, up against the wheel well. Disconnect it. Next, we're going to reinstall the new pad wear sensor. Clicking into place. And first, we're going to get it in the electrical box back here. Get that closed and resealed. The little mounting grommets all the way back to the caliper. It sits up here inside the bleed screw cover. And then lastly, we'll just click it into place on the brake caliper. You'll feel it lock in place, and that's it. Easy. And before you forget, reinstall the guide pin covers. They just click back into place. So you want to get these anti-rattle clips sitting on the caliper carrier first, so these ears should be sitting. And you want to push from the center inward until they hook into place like so. So to make sure that they're in, you just want to make sure that these little ears here are actually sitting inside this mounting hole on the caliper. If you want, you can take a flathead screwdriver, just press on them real quick. But they're in. That's just a spring-loaded mechanism, and it prevents the caliper from moving around while braking. Otherwise, you hear a bunch of knocking from this outboard pad, hence why it's called an anti-rattle clip. But TRW includes them with their brake pads for the TRW Ultras, so always nice to reinstall new ones, particularly when your old ones look all crusty and nasty like this. And that's pretty much it. Now would be a good time to flush out the brake fluid if it was the time to do so. But really it's going to be the same process on the other side, just don't have to worry about the pad wear sensor, since the pad wear sensor is only on the front left on an F30. All right, so that's how you do the front brakes on any F30 that has floating style front calipers, or as we just know, the more traditional style calipers that BMW's used for a long period of time. Of course, some of the F30s have the Brembo style calipers, but we do have a DIY video on that in case your vehicle applies. But for anybody that has these floating style front calipers, this is going to be the video for you. So I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, leave in the comment box below. Hit that like button if you like this video. Also hit subscribe, lots more videos on the way. And as always, we'll see you for the next one. Thank you for watching.